Good afternoon. Parliament is resumed. When we took the lengthy luncheon adjournment suspension, I think we had completed all of the government business such as it was and the obituaries. And although today is Wednesday, I understand that the Premier is inclined for us to proceed with the private member motions. Madam Premier, could I have an indication as to when it is likely that Finance Committee will meet? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we had envisioned and planned for Finance Committee to convene at 9 a.m. on Friday, but should it be the wish of your good self and the will of the House to sit until we conclude the motions today, I can shift gears and come tomorrow. If you're not so minded, I will be so guided.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think we'll have to play that one by ear, depending on how much debate ensues as a result of the private members' motions. It's almost impossible to predict. Sometimes they go through on the nod. But I see there is one here to be moved by the elected member for West Bay West, who is not the shortest man I know. But we'll see where we get to. Madam Clerk.
Motions. Private members, motion number 1 of 2024-2025. Motion on removing the restrictions on stamp duty concessions for first-time Caymanian home buyers. To be moved by the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, elected member for Georgetown North, and seconded by the elected member for Georgetown East.
I recognize the Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to move private members motion number 1 of 2024-2025. And the motion is on removing the restrictions on stamp duty concessions for first-time Caymanian home buyers. And whereas successive governments have supported a policy aimed at encouraging Caymanian home ownership by providing concessions on ad valorem stamp duty for Caymanians purchasing their first home or land. And whereas the Stamp Duty Act 2019 revision enshrines such concessions, and it has been amended and updated over time to ensure that the policy to encourage Caymanian home ownership meets the needs of the day. And whereas, despite these provisions, the Stamp Duty Act has historically excluded properties in certain blocks and parcels within West Bay and Georgetown from qualifying for these concessions. And whereas the current restrictions unfairly prevent first-time Caymanian homebuyers from receiving the concessions when purchasing property in designated areas in West Bay and Georgetown. Be it therefore resolved that the government consider removing the arbitrary and inequitable restrictions on which properties qualify for concessions when Caymanians are purchasing their first owner-occupied home or first property.
The motion has been duly moved. Is there a seconder? The Honourable Member of Georgetown East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to second the motion.
The motion has been duly moved and seconded. Does the mover wish to speak thereto?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it shouldn't be too long, as I think I've spoken to most members in the House and seem to have received favorable response. But, Mr. Speaker, The motion calls for the government to consider removing the restrictions on stamp duty concessions for Caymanians buying their first home or their first property. This restriction prevents first-time Caymanian home buyers from accessing concessions if they wish to buy a home or a property in certain parts of Georgetown and West Bay, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this includes areas in my constituency such as Watlers Road, Eastern Avenue, Marbell Drive or Parkway, certain areas of Essex Tibbetts. Mr. Speaker, I'll pass you these maps that I have here highlighted most of the block and parcel numbers or block numbers, and it covers all along West Bay Road into South Church Street, central parts of Georgetown such as Goring Avenue, etc. I'll hand these so you can have a look, Mr. Speaker. Can you make copies for the members?
Honorable Leader, I was going to say, I'll have a quick look at them, but I think it's even more important that members do. So while you're proceeding with the balance of your speech, I will ask the parliamentary page to ensure that the copies are made for every member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that map cuts just short of the remainder of a couple of blocks along South Church Street. Mr. Speaker, successive governments, including the PPM administrations, have rightly recognized the importance of encouraging Caymanian home ownership. And after all, home ownership is about more than a roof over our head, but it's about stability, prosperity, and our long-term security. Mr. Speaker, it represents a stake in our country's future. Mr. Speaker, expanding home ownership also has significant economic benefits. It stimulates growth, strengthens community stability, and drives economic development, benefiting both individuals and the society as a whole. By helping more Caymanians achieve home ownership, we invest in a stronger, more resilient economy for the future, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over the decades, governments have provided various programs that support home ownership, like the Government Guaranteed Home Assistance Mortgage Scheme, where the government guarantees the mortgage down payment to a bank. There's also the Build on Your Own Property home ownership program, in which the National Housing Development Trust, or NHDT, will build a pre-approved home at affordable prices. And of course, we have the NHDT Affordable Homes, where homes are constructed and sold to qualifying Caymanians at a heavily discounted price. None of these home ownership programs, Mr. Speaker, have restrictions on property locations to receive the relevant benefits from the program. The First-Time Caymanian Home Buyer Program is aimed at Caymanians who are financing their own homes or buying property but need a break on the duty the government usually charges when a property is purchased or sold. May I say at this time, Mr. Speaker, that the value of the property under the program is also capped at a certain value. It also assists with second homes under certain circumstances and allows Caymanians to come together to buy property as an investment. Yet this program excludes Caymanians from getting the benefits of the program when purchasing properties in certain areas. Imagine, we have no restrictions on foreigners buying property anywhere on the island, but we have a restriction on Caymanians getting the opportunity to buy properties in certain parts of the island. Mr. Speaker, I will be the first to admit that these restrictions were missed when we made amendments to the stamp duty law in previous years, but we now need to fix it. I suspect that decades ago, when these restrictions were included in the Act, there was, and I am sure, good intent behind them. However, despite the well-meaning intentions of legislators from years gone by, these restrictions are outdated and arbitrary today. This exclusion is not just a technical matter. It directly impacts the dreams and opportunities of Caymanians who wish to own their own first homes in these areas. Imagine, if you will, Mr. Speaker, a young Caymanian couple wanting to buy their first home in the neighborhood where they grew up, where their family and friends are, only to be told that they cannot receive the same support that is available to others simply because of where they want to live. This is unfair and unjustifiable. It creates an inequitable system where some are arbitrarily excluded from the very support meant to uplift our Caymanians. Mr. Speaker, we had a circumstance in Watlers Road, known as Dog City, where a family member finally convinced the remainder of the family from the estate to sell him the home, which was in a dilapidated condition and is now fixed up and looks beautiful, but was then faced with the full force of the stamp duty regime. Imagine Eastern Avenue. There's a family I'm working with now that are trying to get the family estate sorted. The gentleman is well in his 70s and has never owned a property, and if he gets the estate sorted, he's going to be faced with the full force of the stamp duty regime. Imagine a young lady who realized her dream and found a fixer-upper in Britannia that fell within the values of the first-time Caymanian stamp duty regime concession, only to go under contract with the purchase and then to find out that she cannot afford the stamp duty. These restrictions currently in place, Mr. Speaker, are remnants of a different time and context, and they no longer serve the best interests of our people. If we aim to truly encourage Caymanian home ownership, we must do so without imposing unnecessary barriers that make the dream of owning a home out of reach for some. The motion before us, Mr. Speaker, calls on the government to consider removing these restrictions that are outdated and inequitable by today's standards. This common sense measure will help level the playing field for first-time Caymanian home buyers, allowing them to access the same concessions regardless of where in the Cayman Islands they choose to live or invest. By supporting this motion, we take a step towards ensuring that all Caymanians have equal opportunities when purchasing their first home. It is about removing barriers, creating opportunities, and building a Cayman Islands where everyone has a chance to thrive regardless of their background or location. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I urge all members of this honorable House, in particular the Georgetown and West Bay members, to support this motion. Let us all act in the best interest of our people. Let us remove these restrictions and make the dream of home ownership a reality for more Caymanians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Leader of the Opposition. Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the government to provide the government's response on government motion number 1, which was just moved.
Private member's motion.
Sorry, this is second fraudulence for the day. Private member's motion number 1, moved by the Honorable Leader of the Opposition and seconded, I believe, by the former Leader of the Opposition. Thank you. I think I got it right. Mr. Speaker, the current stamp duty concessions to Caymanians purchasing either their first or second properties are being done by the Commissioner of the Stamp Duty pursuant to a policy which was expanded by Cabinet and approved in 2023 by virtue of Section 26 of the Stamp Duty Act. As a result of the said expansion, Mr. Speaker, there were noteworthy stamp duty concessions on raw land and developed residential property for the purpose of first-time and second-time immovable property. Mr. Speaker, the Caymanians purchasing their first property are eligible for either a full abatement of stamp duty or a reduced stamp duty rate based on the type of the property, whether it's raw land or developed residential property. and the market value and purchase price of the property within a given threshold or dollar value. There are also concessions, Mr. Speaker, for Caymanians purchasing their second property where the lower stamp duty rates may be afforded dependent or defined on a particular criteria. And Mr. Speaker, just for the record, there's a full waiver of stamp duty for raw land up to values of $250,000, developed residential property up to $550,000, and for the second to 10 qualified, from 2 to 10 who are qualified purchasers, the value is $450,000. For raw land and developed residential property, the value is $600,000. Reduced rate on duty for the difference in value between the first and the second is 3.75%, and the values between $250,000 to $350,000 on raw land and developed residential property, values between $550,000 and $650,000. And for 2 to 10 qualified purchasers, the value for raw land is $450,000 to $550,000, and for developed residential property for 2 to 10 qualified purchasers is $600,000 to $700,000. For the second property purchase, Mr. Speaker, the reduced rate of 3.75% on raw land is $300,000, which is $50,000 more than what it would be for the first one. The developed residential property is $600,000, and for 2 to 10 qualifying purchaser, the values is $550,000, and for developed residential property, which is land with development in it, obviously, it's up to $700,000. And Mr. Speaker, the Stamp Duty Act, however, currently excludes, as the Honourable Member spoke to, properties in certain blocks from qualifying for stamp duty concessions, and they are numerous actually. 5D, 10A, 10E, 11B, 11C, 11D, 12D, 12E, 13B, 13C, 13E, 14BG, 14BH, 14BJ, 14CJ, 17A, 18A, and OPY+. Also 5C and 12C, where the parcel has water frontage or is derived in the future from a parcel which has water frontage from the 1st of July 2006. And 13D, where the parcel has road frontage on Eastern Avenue. And I think the member alluded to some of those in his contribution. Also, we have 13EH, where the parcel, Mr. Speaker, has road frontage to West Bay Road, Eastern Avenue, and North Church Street. Also, the current stamp duty, Mr. Speaker, concessions do not extend to properties in commercial zones within the District of Georgetown. Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that many of the excluded areas mainly consist of higher valued properties. And so, Mr. Speaker, based on the historical trends, when I looked at it, the Lands and Survey Department's forecast of the possible loss in stamp duty that would otherwise be payable should this not be changed, if the motion is accepted and action, is estimated to be between 1.4 and 3.8 million Cayman Islands dollars per annum, assuming that potential purchases meet the other prerequisites and the threshold criteria. Mr. Speaker, based on the trends noted by the Lands and the Survey Department, the purchases in the current exempted areas typically do exceed the value threshold in most of the cases. Also, we heard from the Honourable Leader of the Opposition that there were individual specific cases that had been brought to his attention. As such, we believe, Mr. Speaker, on the government bench that removing the location exemption on these defined areas may not see the benefits hoped to accrue to our aspiring Caymanians for the first-time home owners. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, based on the estimates of the potential revenue, I beg your indulgence. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, based on the estimates of the potential revenue to be foregone from a change in the stamp duty concession policy to not exclude any properties, the Ministry of Finance advises that this change in policy would have a minimal impact on the overall government's financial performance and position. So, Mr. Speaker, I think we ought to make it abundantly clear that there are no restrictions for Caymanians owning property in any part of the Cayman Islands. The restrictions that currently exist refers to Caymanians not being able to obtain a stamp duty concession. It's a fine line, but it's a distinct difference. If the Caymanian chooses to buy property in certain areas of Cayman, that's when this restriction that Honourable Leader has brought to the attention that obtain and is hurting some Caymanians exists. So I want it to be clearly known that Caymanians and non-Caymanians alike are free to own property anywhere within the islands, but with the exemption that currently exists, there is, in my respectful view, a financial bias. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, the government's position is that we take due note of the movers' very important and timely motion, and that we and the government will take it under active consideration. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Premier. Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? The Honourable
Former.
Member for Georgetown East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Light-hearted moment. Mr. Speaker, as a seconder of this motion, I rise to support it wholeheartedly. Thank you. Can I just put that there? Mr. Speaker, as the second seconder of this motion, I rise to support it wholeheartedly. As the mover has noted, it's a matter of fairness and equal opportunity for all Caymanians. Delighted to hear that the government agrees that they will take this under consideration. But I do have a few observations to make with regard in support of the motion, Mr. Speaker. The restrictions we are discussing today are not merely inconvenient. To us, they actively prevent otherwise qualified Caymanians from accessing the stamp duty concessions available under the law when purchasing their first homes. And these restrictions, Mr. Speaker, are based solely on location, affecting, as we member pointed out in the mover, Eastern Avenue, West Bay Road, North Church Street, other parts of Georgetown, places where many of our people have long-standing connections and many wish to live. Mr. Speaker, I recall in my own term as Minister of Finance that there was at least one occasion when, that request came in for a waiver of stamp duty, asking me to exercise my discretion in waiving stamp duty for a piece of property that was being sold in, I think it's Park Group Block 13, which was right in right behind the Marion Plaza on the West Bay Road, down in Rockhold, not Rockhold, but the Watlers Road area. Mr. Speaker, this issue goes beyond location. It's about the fundamental right of Caymanians to benefit from the same support that others received. Yet, they can be and are denied this support simply because of where they wish to buy a home, even if it's in the very neighborhood they grew up in, surrounded by family and friends. Caymanians who meet every other qualification should not be penalized because of an arbitrary restriction tied to geography. And that, I think, is one of the crux of the matter with regard to this motion being brought by the Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, home ownership is one of the most essential ways individuals and families can build stability, wealth, and a sense of belonging. The opportunity to own a home should not depend on whether a Caymanian chooses to live on one side of the street or the other. These outdated location-based restrictions are barriers standing in the way of hard-working Caymanians, and I think that removing them will open the door to a more equitable future for some of our people. Mr. Speaker, my view is that these restrictions are relics of a bygone era. They no longer reflect the realities of modern Cayman. The neighborhoods affected by these rules are not exclusive or out of reach. In fact, they are home to many of the very people we represent, people who deserve the same opportunity to benefit from stamp duty concessions as anyone else in the country. In supporting this motion, we address more than an otherwise nondescript section of the law. We are leveling the playing field and ensuring that all Caymanians, regardless of where they choose to live, can access the support they need to achieve home ownership. Mr. Speaker, I urge all members of this Honourable House to support the motion. By removing these outdated restrictions, we will give more Caymanians a chance to own their homes, build their futures, and invest in their communities. Supporting the motion is about removing unnecessary roadblocks and empowering our people to achieve the dream of home ownership, a dream that should be within the reach for all of us. And I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? The Honourable Minister for Tourism and Ports.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be rather quick, but to say, though the Honourable Premier has already opined on it, we welcome the motion, but we think it's important to this Honourable House note for the Hansards that this policy was not put in place during this administration, and we too are minded that there should be equal opportunity for all Caymanians, and we will be doing the necessary considerations. I was trying to, Mr. Speaker, while the Honourable Member was on his feet, to find out the exact dates and what administration it transpired in, but fell short of time. But I don't think it's important now to go over that, but more importantly, to go forward in finding a solution. And as the Honourable Premier has said, we will consider and hopefully within short order be able to come back with positive changes that will affect all the people of these islands. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other, the Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Also, just wanted to add a brief contribution. Thank the opposition for the motion. I was relieved when we discussed it in caucus and talking to the Premier that although in 2023 we made additional enhancements, we did acknowledge when we talked internally that there is scope to do more. In May of this year, when I had the honor to act for the Premier as Minister for Finance, and you see the requests come in, there are some heartbreaking examples. So I rise, Mr. Speaker, to maybe add a bit of reiteration on the human toll, because this is one of the things that causes angst in our young people, that they have done what we've told them to do. They've gone overseas, they've got their qualifications, they've got their good job, and yet they fall short in their loan packages from a bank, and just with a little bit of a break, they could get onto the property ladder. And without that additional flexibility from their own home government, then they feel frustrated. They feel displaced. They feel that they have done everything that we have asked them to do, and now, instead of going to other jurisdictions and actually coming home and bringing that brain power home, they just ask for a little bit more flexibility. And that could not just lower the temperature of the angst that I think in particular young people feel, but inspire them and inspire others behind them to come and take our places. And I think, as the leader of the opposition was alluding to, one of us wouldn't have been around when the policy was first crafted, but I would imagine that it might have been thought of in some of these areas, if you can afford to buy in that area, you should be able to afford the stamp duty, I imagine. But in this day and age, with the property prices as they are, some of those that were coming across our desk and across our purview are middle-class areas. It's just that the price is just so high that I think if that was the prior historical rationale, it just no longer holds true. So I'm relieved that on our side that there is agreement, and I think this is a good point of agreement for the House to work together on, to offer a bit more flexibility. And I do agree with the wording of the motion that some of the restrictions at this point feel a bit arbitrary, which is why we made some of the changes in 2023. But I think there's scope to do a bit more. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Premier. Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If no other member wishes to speak, or I should say, as no other member wishes to speak, I invite the Honorable Leader of the Opposition to exercise his right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me first thank those members who have spoken. Thank the seconder of the motion, the member from Georgetown West for East for his support and for seconding the motion. Let me also say to the member from Georgetown Central, Honorable Minister, I should say, of Tourism, that I did say in my contribution that this policy has been in place for quite some time, including and was overlooked when we brought amendments to the Act during our time, during our administration. So by no means pointing any fingers. I think, if my memory serves me, that this goes back to when there was a tiered stamp duty tiered stamp duty regime, where you started at 9.5 at a certain area and it went down, and I think that had some negative effects on the economy, and eventually went to where we had one standard stamp duty across the board. Let me, Mr. Speaker, thank the Honorable Deputy Premier for adding the human side to it. And what do you tell those young people when they are trying and they're trying and they're trying and they're trying? And can you fault a Caymanian for wanting to live closer to town, for wanting to live near all the activities? If you grew up on South Church Street or North Church Street or Parkway or Snug Harbor, all these places that Caymanian families are, that you can't find somewhere near to what you're accustomed to living in because it is just out of your reach by that much, and because it's in that area, you do not have access to government programs that will assist you in realizing your dream of owning a home in your desired location. And why would we ever want to, and I think they ever want to exclude or take away that opportunity? We should do everything that we can to help uplift our people. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honorable Premier for her indication that the government will consider the motion, and for her clarification, because I did get a little carried away when I said that we were restricting Caymanians from owning in certain areas. I certainly did not mean that. I should have been clearer where we are removing the help that's available, the concessions that are available to Caymanian first-time homeowners based on where they're desiring to live. I think that time will show, Mr. Speaker. A lot of the area included, OPY included North Church Street, included the Goring Avenue area. We saw a development that it failed planning approval. It did not get its planning approval, but it was a high-rise apartment complex. Not all Caymanians now want to have a house and a yard. Not all Caymanians want a big family, can't afford one. You can't afford landscaping, you can't afford pool. You know, West Bay Road on the beach, if someone gave me a condo, I'd try to sell it before the first strata bill came, because I can't afford a strata bill. You know, but if I could get a little apartment, a little one-bedroom apartment in a 10-story building in Georgetown, when that time comes around for the value, I'll take it. I'll take it. A lot of our kids now, we're sending our kids to the UK, city living. They're going all over the world, living in cities, getting used to living in cities, getting used to public transport, things that we need here. This is the future. We talk about sustainability. We can't keep just having quarter-acre house lots and half-acre house lots and expect that we'll be able to accommodate all of our people. To think that we will be able to have a market, a real estate market that Caymanians will be able to buy, to find a home, to find a little something to call their own rather than renting a little something that's not even theirs. So, Mr. Speaker, I won't take up any more time, but to say thank you to those who spoke, and thank you to the Honourable Premier and the government for their consideration of this motion. May God bless you all.
The question is, whereas current restrictions unfairly prevent first-time Caymanian homeowners from receiving a concession when purchasing property in designated areas in West Bay and Georgetown. Be it therefore resolved that the government consider removing the arbitrary and inequitable restrictions on which properties qualify for concessions when Caymanians are purchasing their first owner-occupied home or first property. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it, I do believe. The motion, private members' motion number 1 of 2024-2025, motion on removing the restrictions on stamp duty concessions for first-time Caymanian home buyers is duly passed. Madam Clerk. Madam Premier, we are approaching, or by my watch, have passed the hour of interruption. May I invite you to suspend Standing Order 10-2 in order that the business of the House may continue beyond the hour of interruption.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Standing Order 10-2 be hereby suspended to allow the business of the House to continue beyond the hour of 4:30 p.m.
Thank you. The question is that Standing Order 10-2 be suspended in order that the business of the House may continue beyond the hour of 4:30. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. I believe the ayes have it. Standing Order 10-2 is accordingly suspended.
Private members' motion number 2 of 2024-2025. Motion to expunge criminal records. To be moved by the elected member for Bordentown West and seconded by the elected member for West Bay West.
I recognize the Honourable Member for Bordentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to move private members' motion number 2 of 2024-2025. that deals with the motion to expunge criminal records. And the motion reads, whereas the Parliament has a responsibility to make laws for good government, and whereas factors of good government include adapting to shifts in societal attitudes, political consensus, as well as equity and fairness, and whereas many countries around the world have decriminalized or intend to decriminalize the possession and use of cannabis subject to various criteria being met, be it therefore resolved that the government considers amending the Criminal Record Spent Convictions Act 2018 revision to make a provision for the expungement of the criminal conviction of those convicted for offenses pursuant to the Misuse of Drug Act 2017 revision, specifically in relation to possession of cannabis for an amount equal to or 1 ounce or less for personal use.
The motion has been duly moved. Is there a seconder?
Mr.
I
Speaker,
recognize the honorable member for West Bay West.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to second the motion.
The motion has been duly moved and seconded. Does the honorable member wish to speak thereto?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I think the motion itself is pretty straightforward. And I want to also start off, Mr. Speaker, by thanking you, because as I look at the Criminal Record Spent Convictions Law of 2018 revision, Act, thank you, I noticed it was originally enacted in October 2016, which means it's something that came in under your leadership as Premier then. And I noticed that since that time, there have been one change to it, which was March 2017, which again was also under your leadership. Like anything, Mr. Speaker, and that's a good thing about democracy, is that as society attitudes changes, we, I guess, as legislators also have to adjust or adapt to these changes. One of the things I do recognize, Mr. Speaker, is that the act itself recognizes, or that was passed, recognizes that we are about giving people second chances. And one of the things that the law made, the act made clear, and I just want to read part 4, section 4 of the law that basically says, the primary objective of this law is to implement a scheme to limit the effect of a person's conviction for a range of offenses if the person, having served that person's sentence, subsequently completes a period of crime-free behavior, and on completion of that period, the conviction shall be regarded as spent, and subject to some exceptions, a person is eligible to apply for the expungement of that criminal record. So the law itself, Mr. Speaker, is very clear in terms of what the intention is. And if you look also at section 14 of the law, Mr. Speaker, and just to kind of sum it up, I guess, for members and the listening public, rather than go through the entire law itself, which is actually quite detailed. In essence, the law recognizes that there will be mistakes made by people, and they can apply to have those mistakes corrected. In some cases, the law also sets out the crime-free period in which they can apply for to have the record expunged, or in simple layman terms, cleared. Now, one of the things I looked at with regards to the possession of marijuana is that the law automatically allows, after 5 years of, I guess, a conviction, and there have been no repeat or anything like that, that a person will automatically get an expungement. What section 14 of the law also allows, Mr. Speaker, is that if a person feels as if though they don't have to wait, they don't want to wait the 5 years, they can apply before the 5-year period for the board to consider it. And what this motion is basically asking for is that rather than have the 5-year automatic be, I guess, set in stone, recognizing that people can apply before, is that we look at what the automatic exception, that automatic period should be. And I'm thinking maybe somewhere around 2 years or something, I think is something reasonable. But again, I left that kind of blank to leave it, I guess, up to members to decide what they think would probably be best. I must admit, Mr. Speaker, this is not something that I campaigned on, and I know for other members inside this honorable house that the issue of cannabis or marijuana or no weed, no vote, whatever, was part of the last election. I think that there is some consensus amongst us, I guess a majority of us at least, at a minimum, that at least for us, people within our society, recognizing that once this conviction stays on their record, it's very difficult for them to apply for even a U.S. visa, in some cases jobs or anything else. And while, like I said, they can apply before the 5-year period, I think, and that will be at the discretion of the board, I think if it gives us an opportunity to send a message to say, you know what, we think that maybe after 2 years, 3 years, 2.5 years or something, this is something that should be expunged off someone's record as opposed to waiting to the 5 years or for it being discretionary. So the law itself, as it stands right now, does allow a lot of what it is, but all I'm asking for in a nutshell is that 5-year period reduce from 5 years to maybe say 2 years or 2.5 years, something like that, is really what it is I'm looking for to make the automatic expungement. And again, also to note that while my motion didn't limit 1 ounce of ganja, I did also put that inside there to some extent, because at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, we still need to have some level of deterrence. I mean, smoking itself is bad for someone's health, and regardless of whatever people's views are on the use of cannabis or marijuana or ganja, at the end of the day, we also, I guess, to some extent, need to protect our young children with regards to things that can probably impact their health in the terms of a long run. I have my own personal views on the use of marijuana. I don't encourage anyone to take it. I don't encourage my kids to smoke ganja or anything like that, or kids to do so. But at the end of the day, I do recognize that that's my personal view, and others people are entitled to theirs. But at a minimum, while people do make their mistakes along the way, we still need to, as a society, recognize that we need to give them a chance to fix certain things. This issue, Mr. Speaker, has been popping up and on and off my radar for quite some time. But a few weeks ago, I met a mother at an event, and when she told me what her 2 sons went through in terms of that period before they could get their record expunged, it really hit home to me with regards to young people not being able to access further education opportunities, job opportunities and everything. And in a nutshell, our sons' lives were a living hell. And at that point, I said, you know what? It's time for us to probably do something about it. And I really want to thank the seconder of the motion, Mr. Speaker, the honorable member from West Bay West, for doing this. And I do recognize also that that the government is also bringing a motion a referendum motion to decriminalize ganja, which is something that they're looking to take to the public at the next general election. So I also welcome that. But I also have to recognize that there have been members inside this honorable house that have also been pushing for quite some time for this issue to be dealt with. And I want to recognize the member from West Bay North. I know this is something that he has been campaigning on for quite some time. And I know even the Premier herself during the last election had also touched on this issue. So while I recognize that the government is looking to move a referendum to deal with this, at a minimum for those right now that are convicted and have this issue on their record and have opportunities limited to them as it is, if we can at least give them this reprieve, I think that would be a step in the right direction. Outside of that, Mr. Speaker, I think it's pretty straightforward, and I will leave I'll save any contributions for when I wrap up. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I recognize the Honourable Deputy Governor, Acting Deputy Governor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the government, I can indicate that Section 14 of the Criminal Records Spent Convictions Act already contains specific rules to allow for the expungement of convictions for minor marijuana offenses, such as simple possession of cannabis, consumption of cannabis, and possession of pipes and utensils used for consumption. There are various criteria which must be met before expungement can be granted under the section of this Act. One is that the person must apply to the expungement board. 2, the person must have been sentenced to a fine or a community-based order And 3, the person must have paid the fine and otherwise completed the sentence. If these conditions are met, the expungement procedure is essentially automatic, Mr. Speaker, provided that the crime-free period has been satisfied. Mr. Speaker, I should add that Section 14 of the Act does not include a limit of the amount of cannabis possessed before an offence of possession can qualify for expungement. Thank you, sir. This means that the offence should qualify for potential expungement whether the amount was more or less than 1 ounce, as long as the drugs were for personal use only, and the sentence imposed was either a fine or a community sentence. However, Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that Section 42 of the Act currently limits the number of expungements from which an offender may benefit to 2, which means that if a person is successfully prosecuted for consuming or possessing cannabis for more than 2 occasions, the only way they may avoid a further conviction is if they are charged and convicted for a third time, is through the referral to the Drug Rehabilitation Court on the basis that they are dependent upon drugs. If they are referred to the Drug Rehabilitation Court, Mr. Speaker, and they comply with the requirements imposed by the court to help them overcome their dependency, they will still be able to avoid a further conviction under Section 4(9) of the Drug Rehabilitation Court Act. Mr. Speaker, I should also add that the Criminal Records Spent Convictions Act has been referred to the Law Reform Commission for a detailed review, following the advice from the Attorney General's chambers, and the Act would benefit from such a review in a number of areas. That referral was duly accepted by the Commission, which has undertaken preliminary work on the matter, in which we'll be continuing to advance this important work. Mr. Speaker, now if you'll allow me just to explain the function of the Expungement Board over the last 3 years as it pertains to convictions of minor marijuana offences. So in the last 3 years, Mr. Speaker, the Expungement Board has received 88 applications, of which 67 were immediately expunged, 15 were not eligible under the Act, 2 convictions had become spent under the previous law, and 4 were deferred. And Mr. Speaker, if you allow me, deferral usually happens when there are other pending charges at the time of the application. But instead of refusing the application, the Expungement Board defers this rather than refuses it to determine what the outcome of those charges will be. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Acting Deputy Governor. Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? I remind members the standing orders say the member shall stand in his or her place. My eyes are getting dim as I age. I need to see you. The Honourable Minister for Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to give contribution, and I almost had to, because I am proud to stand here as the person who brought this motion in 2012 that caused the expunge law to come in place, possibly some 14 years ago. Mr. Speaker, the Caymanian Compass at the time did a story on the motion that I brought in 2012. And if you don't mind, it's a public document.
I think, though, for the record, that 2012 would have been 12 years ago, not 14.
Yeah, 2000 was 12, was in 2012. Yeah. And well, thank you for the help. Mr. Speaker, the the article in the Cayman newspaper at the time said that the MLA, it was at that time, Dwayne Seymour, said Friday, too many young people in the Cayman Islands are paying too high of a price for their first criminal offenses. Criminal records often prevent them from finding work, particularly as more people vie for a smaller pool of positions. Mr. Seymour told the Legislative Assembly as he introduced a private member's motion that seeks to change the rehabilitation of offenders law. Mr. Seymour said he was seeking legislation in the Cayman Islands similar to that proposed in 2009 by the United States Congressman Charlie Rangel. Mr. Rangel's Second Chance for Offenders Act permit for the expunging of or clearing of records for individuals convicted of a first non-violent offense as long as they fulfill all requirements of the sentence set by a court, remain free from dependency or abuse of alcohol and controlled substances for a minimum of 1 year, obtain a high school diploma or equivalent, and complete at least 1 year of community service. It's not just a situation where we're saying you made a mistake, no problem. We will expunge this, go make another mistake. Mr. Seymour said sometimes offenses are left on records for 5 years, 7 years, depending on what it is. We don't want a person to wait for 5 years or 7 years to find employment again. We're talking about offenses that you don't even go to prison for. Mr. Speaker, I want to note that in 2011, some of the reasons why I thought about bringing this motion forward were a lot of people came to meet with me, a lot of young people. They could not attend university, they couldn't get jobs, they couldn't travel with their families. And in looking at the juvenile or teenage suspects in the Cayman Islands, the criminal offenses had doubled in 2011. Some of the more violent crimes blamed on those young offenders increased sharply. According to the records in 2011, there were 307 offenses committed by individuals between the ages of 11 and 18 years old. In 2010, that number was only 150 offenses. The vast number of suspects were male. Out of 77 people convicted in 2011, 62 were young men, 81% of those convicted. Mr. Speaker, I heard the honorable member on the government side and his contribution in terms of what we have now is adequate. But I want us to continuously look at this law to ensure that we're not missing something, because we've got a lot of complaints from persons who apply to this board who are just not getting through and want to get on with their lives. So I want to respect the contribution by the honorable member on our side, and I thank the member from Bordentown West and the seconder from West Bay West for bringing this to light again to ensure that we have equity and fairness in this process, and that we continue to review all that's happening around this board and to try to ascertain how many people are being affected by not given the opportunity to have their convictions expunged. We need to understand the magnitude of it. So, Mr. Speaker, albeit I support what the member from Bordentown West has brought forward, I yield to the government's comments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to give some brief comments on private member's motion number 2. And I listened carefully to the move of the motion. And as I understand it, he is aware of what avenues are available to persons now, but he feels that there should be a bit more discretion, or at least a lower crime-free period, shorter crime-free period, to which persons can apply for the expungement of small amounts of cannabis. Convictions will apply for expungement. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I say that because it's actually not written in the motion, but I understand what the move of the motion is trying to achieve, and we all as representatives have experiences with these sorts of situations. And the courts, I understand, also have the ability, when young persons come before them, to provide judgments that would not allow, judgments that would not create barriers for our young people to get a visa, student visa, etc. But, Mr. Speaker, not everyone has the ability to get a lawyer or has someone to speak for them or a family network to support them in these instances. Mr. Speaker, I was happy to hear from the acting deputy governor that I think I heard him right, that the Law Reform Commission had recently done a review of the Expungement Act, and I assume then that there will be a review done by the government, because I do believe that enough time has passed since the act was enacted. As we all know, that there's no perfect legislation, that enough time has passed that we can now have a look at the act and see where there are discrepancies, where there are issues. Times have changed, as both members, I think, have made mention of, in particular in the way in which we as a society now look at cannabis. Whilst, again, just like the move of the motion, a member from Bordentown West, I am not a proponent of cannabis, never did, never will, but that doesn't preclude the fact that society has changed its views on the use of cannabis. Our young people are exposed to it every day. They're exposed to it in school. They're exposed to it every time we say goodnight to them, we drop them off to the movies or something like that, and we cross our fingers and we say a little prayer. But we know they're going to be exposed to these things. And all we can do is speak to them. We can try to lead by example. We can pray, and we can pray, and we can pray. But it doesn't mean that they won't, in a weak moment, make a wrong decision. Mr. Speaker, I have a situation, a young man that I guess I could say, and I hope he watches it later tonight, I could say I mentor a little bit. But sometimes it feels like he uses me as an opportunity, someone to vent to. Someone, when he gets angry, he vents to me, and that's okay. Because the young man made some bad mistakes early in his life, very, very early in his life. And a near-death experience in a car accident changed his life. Completely turned it around. He now works for government. He now holds a steady job for about 6 years. He's a productive member of society. If you saw him out, you would never think that he got in the kind of trouble that he got into many years ago. But the period of time to expunge his convictions, I think, is 12 years. And he's actually in need of some reconstructive surgery from his accident and cannot get a visa to travel to get that surgery. It's a heartbreaking decision. And when he gets frustrated, he messages me and he expresses his frustration. I feel it. So I think it is time that we have a look at it. There certainly needs to be, I think the board needs some ability to have a bit of discretion, or there need to be some other, opportunities for young persons like that who can clearly demonstrate that they have changed, that when we put persons in prison today, or when we sentence someone, we have gone away from the sentencing or the incarceration as being a punishment. It should be a rehabilitation period, a rehabilitative effort. And so when someone has done their time or done their sentence, but has also proven through their actions over a period of time that they are now rehabilitated, and they are now a constructive and positive contributor to our society, the board should have the ability to look at that evidence and perhaps lessen the period of time. So we have here in opposition, in principle, we have no real issues with the motion as it is. And we heard from the government, like I said, I was happy to hear that there had been a review, and I look forward to further reviews and perhaps some amendments coming to the Parliament in the near future. Because like I said, there is no perfect law, and I think this particular act has had enough time and action that we can identify any issues or any shortcomings that may be that we may have missed when the act was first drafted. So those few words, I say thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Leader of the Opposition. The Honorable Member for West Bay North.
Mr. Speaker, when this bill was passed, we thought it would help, and it has in some cases, but there seems to be a lot of red tape, unnecessary red tape. I've had young people come to me with a paper in their hand signed by the Deputy Governor saying that it's clean, but yet the records, people is refusing to give them a clean record. These are the things that we have to look into. I've always supported the bill, whether it's to be with cannabis or whatever it is. Wiping clean after people have proven themselves. Why I campaigned on this, Mr. Speaker, there was a 62-year-old man in West Bay who got in trouble for a spliff at the age of 19. And at the age of 52 had a heart attack and could not be taken to the United States just because something that happened when he was a 19-year-old. So that was one of the reasons I supported this when it came here, and I campaigned on it. So to shorten it to 2 or 3 years, it's, once you talk it over with the Attorney General and those people, I think it's anything to help our people, because too many young people can't get jobs because of a simple mistake they made. It does not only something to do with the spliff, it's other things that they have done when they were young that they realized that they were wrong, and they have repented and they have shown they can do it. So I will be voting for it.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Does any other member wish to speak? The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just extremely brief, because of the lateness of the hour, and history would show that I am not one that just like to speak. So let me just put the preface out right up front. But suffice to say, Mr. Speaker, that the government has duly considered the motion. We concur with the sentiments so eloquently expressed by the acting Deputy Governor, and we recognize that the resolution does ask the government to consider, and we take that against the background that Section 14 does already allow for the 5-year automatic expansion and 2-year discretionary expansion. But I think what is probably foremost in our minds is that there's a referendum that has been, the motion has been passed, the bill, I won't anticipate my debate, but it's due to come in the next sitting, which is probably the first, second week of September, to be dealt with, where the people can have their say, and it would be a fully consultative democracy with the exercise of their right on election for 2025. But also, it has been said by the government that the law reform, Honourable AG has confirmed that they are reviewing it, and as Lord Dinnan say, the law is an ASS. This law is no exception to what he said many, many years ago in 1932, which you're more than familiar with, I suppose, Mr. Speaker, having studied at the same legal institution and did quite well yourself, if I might say so. And so the government has nothing really to lose but to be fair in its consideration, to use this as one of the assumptions in its consideration, and we would be accepting the motion, but to say that we're already in the act of doing it. So for us to get up, Mr. Speaker, and say, no, we're not going to accept it when we know that we're doing it, would be kind of an oxymoron. So in the interest of peace and brevity and sisterhood and brotherhood, and that's probably Juliana terminology, the government will accept it this afternoon.
Thank you, Madam Premier. You were in full flight, so I didn't want to stop you. But I don't think you meant the next sitting in September. December.
Oh, absolutely, Mr. Speaker. That's the third Freudian slip. The next sitting in September, I'll be doing what you like to also do, farming up on the bluff, sir. It's December, most definitely.
Okay. My eyes are going, but my hearing is improving. The Honourable Minister for Tourism and Ports.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's good to have gentle laughter in these late hours. Mr. Speaker, I hope without the effort of repeating what other members said, I think obviously you've heard our Premier say our position in respect to the government's viewpoint. Just to add some more context to the conversation, though, Mr. Speaker, I think it's interesting that we consider the world that we live in today, particularly that from a media perspective, particularly that of a social media perspective. What I'm getting at, Mr. Speaker, is the provisions of a record when developed many, many hundreds of years ago in the Commonwealth system. It was to inform those within our society the persona or the characteristics of an individual, a time when technology was not as advanced as it is today. Mr. Speaker, regardless if there was no record available for these crimes, I dare say you can't hide who you are anymore or what you have done anymore. And that's a good thing, but could come with some difficulties. And I think the intent of the mover of this motion is to not make it any more difficult than it is already. It was so interesting. I was reading an article just yesterday that spoke about the potential challenge to a person charged with the crime of rape and whether that individual should have the protection of their name until the case is over. Because what happens if that individual is found not to be guilty, or the case is thrown out, or it's found that the accuser was actually lying the whole time? In today's day and today's time and technology, a person's reputation can be damaged without repair. And I think, Mr. Speaker, the good member from Bordentown West is intending to, though he knows quite well that there's a referendum coming before, until the people have had their say, we have to assume the status quo will be the same. And in the event that they say no to that question, at the very least, we make it a little bit easier for those who may find themselves infractions of the law for minor issues. I think it's important that we recognize nobody in this honorable parliament is of the view that major things should be exempt for a short period of time, but there has to be an adjusted approach to how we rehabilitate a person who makes a mistake in their life or breaks the law. So, considering the social media effects, I think, Mr. Speaker, the reform that we are speaking of, which is welcomed by the Law Reform Commission that the government will have to consider in short order, we'll probably have to do that quite often because the landscape of information and the availability of it is changing so rapidly, hence the reason why we're considering this today. So with that being said, I really want to thank the mover of the motion who has always been committed to, even people like myself who've made mistakes. Some people know that myself and the good member have a very strong relationship, and it's because of these types of motions and these principles of what he stands for why our relationship is that strong. Because like many others that maybe didn't want to give me a second chance, he stood like a brother there with me. So I commend him for bringing it. But as our honorable leader has said, we are already in the process of considering this very important topic. And it just proves that he is bringing it to light for the good people of the Cayman Islands to see that it's a priority for him as well. With that being said, Mr. Speaker, those are my contributions.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? As no other member wishes to speak, I'll invite the mover to exercise his right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank everyone who has contributed today. And I'd be remiss, Mr. Speaker, if I did not single out the acting deputy governor. And the reason I want to raise that issue, Mr. Speaker, is that a while back, I had a young person who, again, made mistakes along the way. And through the efforts of the acting deputy governor personally, because I did reach out to him, he was able to find a place for that person in the government second chance program. And I can tell you from my regular interactions with the individual's mother, they are basically extremely grateful to see their son being given a chance to be a productive member within our community again. I do recognize, Mr. Speaker, that there are many families that this have affected. There was a time in our history where once you got caught with ganja, you were automatically sent to prison, I think, in Jamaica for like 6 months or something. I mean, that is where we are coming from. But nonetheless, we're still a country or a nation, whether small or not, of second chances. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, I think everyone inside here at some point can find their own second chance story, whether it was from an illegal act or even just from a regular act. I have my own second chance story, Mr. Speaker, where I should have lost my scholarship, and the government of the day felt as if though, you know what, we're going to give him an opportunity to continue. And it was that second chance that gave me the opportunity to go back, resume my studies, and I guess stand there in the Parliament of the Cayman Islands today. So I know what second chance is about, and I'm sure many people have similar stories. My good friend from the Minister for Tourism and Ports from Georgetown Central just even hinted his own second chance story. And this is what it is that we are about. And I do recognize also that even in some cases, it's been, I was reminded that even when a record is expunged, once the U.S. authorities know about it, they still hold it against the person. So they themselves have another challenge to overcome, in the sense that once it's in the system, and not many foreign governments may even look past it. But at a minimum, while we can't make legislation that will affect foreign governments, what we can do is make legislation that will benefit our own people. And I think the message that I want people listening to take away from this is that while we'd love for you to not make mistakes, period, we do recognize that people will make mistakes, people will stumble along the way. You'd be surprised to see what the triggers can be sometime for some people to just have a brief moment where they step out of line. And in a very small community, it's very easy for us to hold things against people. And the reason why I really feel bad, Mr. Speaker, for many of our young people is that we have tens of thousands of people that come here from a foreign country. And they come with a clean police record. We don't know those records have been expunged. We don't know a person's background or anything. But they arrive with a clean police record. Yet our own people that's here, because of the smallness of our community, even if the record has been clear, we will remember it. And that's the reality of living in a small community that we have. But nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, I think the message is clear to the listening public, is that at least for the membership in this House, is that we are about giving our people a second chance, and if need be, recognized when they have done something to better themselves. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. I believe I can say there aren't many who haven't made mistakes, but many of us just didn't get caught. The question is, be it therefore resolved that the government considers amending the Criminal Records Spent Convictions Act 2018 revision to make provision for the expungement of the criminal convictions of those convicted for offenses pursuant to the Misuse of Drugs Act 2017 revision, specifically in relation to possession of cannabis for an amount equal to 1 ounce or less for personal use. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. I believe the ayes have it. Accordingly, private members' motion number 3 of 2024-2025, entitled Motion to Expunge Criminal Records, is duly passed. Madam Clerk. Madam Premier, it's not only you that make mistakes, it's private members' motion number 2 of 2024-25, entitled Motion to Expunge Criminal Records.
Private members' motion number 3 of 2024-2025. Motion to acquire Red Spot, Georgetown, block and parcel number OPY5 and OPY7, to be moved by the elected member for West Bay West and seconded by the elected member for Bordentown West.
I recognize the honorable member for West Bay West.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to move private members' motion number 3, standing in my name, which reads as follows. Whereas Caymanians in the fishing community who traditionally utilize Reed Spot for economic opportunities are at risk of losing their prescriptive rights to this piece of land. And whereas Reed Spot is of significant importance to the heritage of the Cayman Islands, and whereas Caymanians who utilize Reed Spot for income generation are in dire need of stability to maintain their fishing pursuits and operations to contribute to the food security agenda of the Cayman Islands, be it therefore resolved that the government considers compulsory acquisition of Reed Spot to facilitate and protect the continued sustenance of the fishing community of the Cayman Islands.
The motion has been duly moved. Is there a seconder?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to second the motion.
The motion has been duly moved and seconded. Does the honourable member, the mover, wish to exercise his right to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment to the motion, and do we take that at this time, or?
You may move that now. I think it would make more sense so that members can vote on that, and that will become part of the
entire motion.
Substantive motion. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I have waived the notice, the normal 2-day requirement for the notice, because while the amendment is important, it doesn't change the context of the motion at all. It just makes it more complete.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in accordance with the provisions of Standing Order 25(1) and 2, I, the elected member for West Bay West, seek to move the following amendment to private members' motion number 3 of 2024-2025 by inserting the words "with the possibility of a fish market" at the end of the resolved section. The new resolved section will read, "Be it therefore resolved that the government considers compulsory acquisition of Reed Spot to facilitate and protect the continued sustenance of the fishing community of the Cayman Islands with the possibility of a fish market."
The amendment to the motion has been duly moved. Is there a seconder?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to second the amendment.
The amendment to the motion has been duly moved and seconded. Does the honourable mover wish to speak to the amendment motion?
No, Mr. Speaker. I'm mindful of the time and mindful of that I will be speaking to the entire motion, and I think members quite understand the amendment. So if that suits you, I will just say that we have moved the amendment, and hopefully members will support it.
Does any other member wish to speak to the amendment to the motion? Does any other member wish to speak to the amendment to the motion? Is the Honourable Minister for Planning proposing to speak? Okay. Does any other member wish to speak to the amendment of the motion? If not, then I invite the mover to exercise his right of reply, non-reply, whatever it is.
Only to thank members for their quiet support and hopefully the allowed support at the end.
The question is that private members motion number 3 of 2024, entitled Motion to Acquire Red Spot, Georgetown, Block and Parcel, OPY and OPY 7, be amended by inserting the words "with the possibility of a fish market," quote unquote, at the end of the resolved section, so that the new resolved section will now read, Be it therefore resolved that the government considers compulsory acquisition of red spot to facilitate and protect the continued sustenance of the fishing community of the Cayman Islands with the possibility of a fish market. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, no. I believe the ayes have it. Private members' motion number 3 of 2024-2025 is accordingly amended in terms just expressed. Does the honorable mover now wish to speak to the amended motion?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, let me thank members. Mr. Speaker, I don't propose to be long, as this motion explains itself very well. Governments in the past, Mr. Speaker, has tried to get cooperation on this matter. This government has tried to get cooperation, all to no avail. And as I said, other governments have tried it. But this is a matter for the public good. As government, we do not propose to allow this matter to languish any longer. It must be dealt with now. That property, Mr. Speaker, has been used for generations, and we propose for the fishermen to continue using it. People, locals and others from all over the island go there to buy a piece of fish. It's very convenient. It's a very convenient location. It deals and allows the fishermen to make a living. It is part of our culture at this point in time, our heritage. I would like to see a fish market there, and hopefully it will be kept simple, Mr. Speaker, simple island style. And Mr. Speaker, I believe the public will welcome this. Certainly the fishermen are happy that we're trying to get to this point. So I do hope the House agrees and the owner would agree without going through compulsory acquisition process. That is my hope. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member, if you'd turn off your mic, please. The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to say that on behalf of the government that we will be accepting the motion as amended. You would know, no doubt, that this has been a long-standing matter that have spanned several administrations where the attempt has been made to try to acquire this very important cultural and heritage significant property that many of the fishermen are using up until today, when we saw the inclement weather coming in the waves from, believe it or not, Milton, that are now traversing downtown Georgetown. From the pictures I see, even to the entrance of the Emsley United Church, as we sit in here and deliberate, they were picking up their tables and tent to try to salvage their livelihood. And so they've been there for a number of years. They've tried through the prescription, through the PLC, as well as through the lands registrar, with no luck. We have tried on this side and to negotiate, as well as I know when I was on the other side, to try to negotiate in an amicable way with the owner. I don't have to call his name, everybody know who's the owner of it. And to date, we have been unsuccessful, and it has reached pretty much a tipping or a boiling point where the owner officer has his rights because he legally owns it. But we're just asking if he's listening, or if there anyone within the chamber who still have an access, pardon upon, to the proprietor of the two parcels there, they would impress upon them that Cayman has been good to both of the owners, and that as a contribution, seeing, as you said this morning, we passed this way but once, and the good book has promised us 70 and 10, and at least one of the owner, if not both of them, has long passed that 7th mark, that it would be a very good illuminating torch to leave before we pass on to the people of the Cayman Islands and say that these fishermen could get it. They depend on this. They are not asking, Mr. Speaker, for a handout. These fishermen are asking for a handout, and I believe that government should be that institution that filled the gaps that the private sector cannot therefore fill. And so we have not given up, Mr. Speaker, the aspiration, and that's about the highest I can put the objective, of having it done by a pure conveyance, even if it has to be done as a special purchaser, which would bring it up to 20% above the current market rate. The government is prepared to find the requisite funds to do that, because we believe that every member in this House, bar none, would be still fully supportive of acquiring this property for the Crown, for the use of the public, obviously, but also for the fishermen there to continue to use it. I've been reliably informed that there have been a legal opinion as to why it could not have gone the way it is. That's water underneath the bridge, so I will not take the time of the Honourable House to go through the 3 or 4 reasons why it was thought that the prescriptive act perhaps was not the best methodology to embark upon to ensure that we get this property. So, Mr. Speaker, the government believe that they have exercised a liberal amount of patience in this exercise, but we're still willing to reach out with an olive arm and ask the proprietors to duly reconsider. As you would know as an attorney yourself, our conveyancing is based off the Australian model, where we have a free enterprise and we're not a jurisdiction that is a Putin jurisdiction, or even the late Castro jurisdiction, where we just walk and take people's property arbitrarily. It has to be one that really has a public interest component. And we believe that if there is ever a need, or indeed a justification, to acquire property for behalf of the people of the Cayman Islands, that this certainly has a gigantic public interest component to it. And so the government, as I said in the first exercise, will continue for a short time to try to resolve it amicably. And we trust that we can come and reason together, and for the interests of all the people, that can be done. As I said, without repeat myself, we're willing even to go to a special interest acquisition if necessary. I'm not proposing that that is the case, but I'm begging on their good graces that they would want to give back to Cayman, because we all know the individuals that own it prior to coming to Cayman, compared with having been in Cayman and still having a desire for Cayman to be the domicile of choice. Cayman has been extremely, extremely good to the individuals. So we're just asking for some bit of compassion, if I may take it so low with my adjectives, that they would consider these poor fishermen and give them a chance to go. We're not asking them to give it for free. Of course, we would not refuse it if they decide to give it for free. But if not, we are willing to take from the public's purse to acquire something in the interest of the public, which, as I said, would not be exclusively utilized by the fishermen, but it would not be restricted from them using it. And so, Mr. Speaker, if the government finds himself in a forced position that we have to instruct the Attorney General, we will so do, and that is the benefit of this motion here today. We should thank the movers for bringing it. It allows this august body to debate it and to illustrate to the wider clients, the public, that this matter is at hand, the position of the entire membership of the House, the importance that we put for it, and that we recognize the privacy of having absolute ownership, but we believe that there should be an overrider if it's in the public's interest. Because of that, if we are not able to come to an amicable position, we will instruct the Attorney General to commence proceedings for legal acquisition thereof, which I hope is not the choice we have to go, but we will if we have to. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Premier. Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Why do you all try my patience at this hour? The Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, rise to make a short contribution to the motion. And after hearing the Premier's contribution, the Premier is right. There have been several efforts over time, to secure the property in one way, shape, or the other, for the purposes that both parties wished for. I think the owner of the property would love to see the property remain in its natural state, for the use of the people, the way he found it when he acquired the property. And then, of course, we would like to see and support the fishermen in having a location to purvey their catch and to make an honest living. And so I agree with the Honorable Premier that I do hope that that the government will be able to come to a agreement with the owners of I think there are 3 parcels in total, not just one. 2 of the parcels have one common owner, and a separate parcel belongs to another party. So I do hope, we came very close in the past. I do know that the main owner is on 2 of the parcels has some concerns about it becoming another 7 Mile Beach or overrun with commercial activity, that sort of thing. So I don't know, in the negotiations with the government, or the government in negotiations with the owner, perhaps will find a way to alleviate those, or to convince the property owner that is and will not be the case, and that the people of the Cayman Islands will have the opportunity to enjoy Red Spot or Dora's Bay as it is. And so we have no issue with it. It's not something, it is not the desired outcome that we would want to see the government have the Attorney General start the process towards compulsory acquisition. I don't think anyone wants to set that precedence where we're going around taking people's properties. But I do believe that there is an opportunity for solution, and we in the opposition are certainly here to support the government in finding that solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Leader of the Opposition. Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable Minister of Planning and Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, colleagues, thank you, sir. Today I stand before you not just as a member of Parliament and a minister, but as a guardian of our heritage and the rights of our people who call these islands home. It is with profound sense of duty and determination that I lend my voice to this private member motion, number 3. A motion that touches the very soul of our nation, so much so that a lot of the fishermen just a little while ago were just out front. They understand that we were bringing this motion, and they were very supportive and emotional about that the government is here today to stand up to do something for them. For far too long, this issue surrounding Red Spot in Georgetown have lingered in the shadows, overlooked and underdressed. Today we bring to them into a light We stand here as the representatives of our people, listening to the voices that echo through our islands, voices that call not from a place of privilege, but from a place deep, enduring the connection to the land and sea. And when I say that echo, even when I was in the BRAC, I had members of the BRAC saying that this is something that the government needs to do. So that even the people in the BRAC understands why we need to go forward with this. On September the 20th, 2023, a group of the fishermen, at that time led by Mr. Billy Adams, stood outside and inside of the government building, merely requesting an audience, sent a simple yet very powerful message. They need to know they have been heard and they are not alone. Mr. Speaker, their difficulties resonate across our islands, where local population increasingly feel the crawling threat of displacement. Mr. Speaker, we cannot afford to ignore this any longer. The land in question is not just a piece of property. It is a symbol of our heritage, a testament to the struggle and the triumphs of our ancestors, and a vital lifeline to the Caymanians today. Mr. Speaker, as a young child, I can remember going with some of the Northsiders when they used to come to town to sell fish and being out there. The land So, Speaker, known as Red Spot, is where our roots are anchored and where our communities' livelihood and our identities are tied. As I was looking back, as the Honorable Miss Sybil McLaughlin once said, our first Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, so properly stated, our history, our heritage, and our culture must be preserved and passed on to future generations, for they are the very soul of our identity. Red Spot is more than a land. It is collective history, and it nourished not only our people, but our very way of life. Mr. Speaker and members, colleagues, we are at a crossroad, and it is incumbent upon us to act now. While the current landowner holds the legal right to the land, we, as the representative of the people, must consider the greater good. Why should our fishing family, who have contributed so much to our islands, be left to navigate the storm or the stormy seas of uncertainty? Why should they be forced to worry about whether they will have access to the very resources they need to feed their family and sustain our community? Across our country, many Caymanians already have been door to door, and even everywhere I would go and mention and stop, that was one of the things that a lot of people, Caymanians, would ask, is that when we are going to do something for the guys on the waterfront. And every time I heard it, it was, is this government going to look at doing something for the people on the waterfront? Mr. Speaker, Mr. Adams and his group, and I call them guardians of our Caymanian legacy, because they were the one that they were fighting and standing up there for their rights, have sounded the alarm, and it is now before us in this honorable House to respond. Mr. Speaker, this matter is deeply personal to me as it impacts local food security. I've made repeated attempts also to pursue to the landowner to sell the piece of this land to the government. Sadly, all previous efforts have been met with disappointment. Until the government and the landowner can agree on a way forward, the fishing community who depend on Red Spot will continue to face uncertainty and instability. Yes, Mr. Speaker, the landowner maintains the right to decide how this land is used. However, we must consider the possibilities that it may be used in ways that could harm our country's long-term interests, our culture, and our ways of life. But I've asked, why should our hard-working fishing families continue to navigate the seas of insecurity and doubt when we have the power in this House to offer them a harbor of hope? And if you think they don't need it, they really do. As the leader of the opposition rightfully said, it's been going on for, seemed like a longer period of time than I thought it was. Actually, it may have been, because I understand it's been going on from time United Democratic Party days. And you know how long I've been, has been trying to do something about this. And also through other parties. But Mr. Speaker, we are here today, and we could no longer sit behind and just allow this to sit stagnant and do nothing about it, and leave our Caymanians at the forefront where they feel there's no hope for them. This truly is the crossroad, and it is the crossroad. Red Spot is not just a plot of land. It is a collective memory, the roots that bind us to our past. Therefore, the fears and concerns raised about Red Spot are not just those of, as I mentioned before, Mr. Adams and his group. The fears are my fears, and their fights are my fights. I don't know who else wants to stand up and fight with them, but I can guarantee you their fight will be my fight also. I call upon each of you, listening closely to the voices of those who have come forward together. We must find a way to preserve the legacy of Red Spot and to safeguard the ancestral lands that are the lifeblood of our communities. And even you can see, sir, when I say lifeblood of our communities, when it's days that the guys aren't fishing, there's a community out there just sitting, and the guys are just chatting and mingling amongst themselves. It is a spot that they come to gather, to talk to one another, to pass on their remarks. Sometimes we're talking about the government, sometimes hopefully a little bit more is the opposition they're talking about, but not the government as much, complaining more about the opposition. But it is a gathering spot for them. So I call upon each of you to listen closely to the voices of those who have come forward. Together we must find a way, preserve the legacy of Red Spot, and safeguard the ancestral lands. Acquiring Red Spot is not merely a pragmatic solution. It is a moral imperative and an obligation to these families, to this community that has given so much to our islands. So members, the eyes of the nation are upon us. They have entrusted us with the responsibility of safeguarding them, their heritage, our way of life, and the prosperity of the islands. Mr. Speaker, I was very glad to hear the Premier first when she got up and said that we are, as a government, we will stand together to make sure we do what we have to do to preserve this spot, no matter what it takes. And hopefully we can get that done very shortly, not a long road to travel. And I can tell the Premier that she has my full support. And I thank the member for West Bay West and the member from Bordentown West. It seems like the two Wests always connecting together and they bring in motions. But I want to thank the two of them also for bringing the motion today and highlighting this motion to know that we really have to do something about this. Really have to do something. And thanking the Premier for what she said, that we're willing to do what we have to do as a government. And not one of those motions that we will say we're considering it. I would not want to say we're considering it, although that's what it says that we have to do. But we're actually going to be doing on it and getting it done. So, Premier, thank you. Thank you for making sure that you push that mantle and we continue to push that to save this spot for our people in the Georgetown. And not only for Georgetown, but for the whole island and those that come there and use it a lot. So, colleagues, every parliament goes down in history with a lasting identity. Some are remembered for their willingness to make tough and principled decisions required to serve the greater good. Today, I'm asking this Honorable House to ensure that our legacy, and want to encourage the conviction and the firm commitment to the people we are elected to serve. To quote one of the political active figures in our country's history, Mr. Armand Pannan, and when he says, "It is our responsibility of every generation to protect the right of the land and the livelihoods of the Caymanian people." Today we have that opportunity to fulfill that responsibility, and we must protect what we know as red spot. Not only for the fishermen who rely on it for today, but to the future proof for the generation of Caymanians who will inherit it tomorrow. Colleagues, this is our moment to provide stability to our Caymanian people. This is our moment to be on the right side of history. This is our moment to act. I humbly sound my support and seek your support for the private member motion number 3 to acquire our red spot Georgetown. And let us drop anchor on a corporation and chart a course that will protect and support our fishing community. Mr. Speaker, I thank you and for my colleagues, and as I mentioned before, the member for West Bay West, the member for Bordentown West, for bringing such an important motion. And I fully 100% support this motion, and I will do my best to make sure that we try to deliver this as quickly and swiftly as we can for the people of this country. Thank you.
The Honorable Minister for Labor
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
and Culture, I should say.
Thank you. I rise, Mr. Speaker, to give a short contribution. Mr. Speaker, I've been to this red spot buying fish very often. And as early as the late 70s, working at the dock on my summer job, frequenting this fisherman's market. As we call it. I was surprised, and as an adult, Mr. Speaker, that it wasn't government's land. Only to find out it's for a private landowner who has been playing ball with us. I think the time for precedence is now. We have to stand up and make a difference. People are saying a lot of things about this government. But let us, this cohort, be the ones that do something proud and bold for our people. Everyone knows how much I love buying beachland and waterfront property. So no one has to ask how I will vote. I know these fishermen. They call me by first name basis. This has gone on too long. In fact, I can't imagine anything else than the fish market being there. The time is now. I will always fight for my people, Mr. Speaker. Fight for my people in Bordentown East. Doesn't necessarily have to be there. Whether it's the East-West arterial that I need to fight for, or even purchasing iconic buildings like the Lighthouse Club, or other entrepreneurial opportunities for our people. Red spot, Mr. Speaker, is our spot, and it will remain our spot. Thank you, Premier, for supporting this effort. Thanks to the members of West Bay West, Bordentown West, for bringing this motion. We have to continue standing up for our people. Jack should never run us from bathing on this beach. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. God bless.
Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable Minister for Tourism and Ports.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am so happy that my colleagues before me on my side got a couple of opportunities to speak before I did. Because gave me the opportunity to reflect and calm down. Because most members on the opposite side and on the government side know how passionate I am about that location. What the good Minister of Infrastructure didn't tell you is the powwows we had in caucus about this spot.
That's true. That's how we have to bring it down.
And the fact that I almost decided to leave this administration because of it. You heard what I said, it's in the hands now. Mr. Speaker, it's important that the Hansards recognize the spot that we are speaking of today falls in my constitutional responsibilities under the Constitution Order 2009 of the Cayman Islands, called Georgetown Central. But, Mr. Speaker, it's more to me than that. Mr. Speaker, the Cayman Islands Compass has done a very awesome thing recently in the new owner's purchase of the company. But they have this thing called, let me find it, Mr. Speaker, forgive me, where they show all the pictures. It's called Time Back, is what they're calling it. Where the tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of images give a record of time of the good people of the Cayman Islands, but in particular, the good people of Georgetown. And a couple Northsiders came down too. And Mr. Speaker, those pictures is probably the best evidence as to the necessity for the motion before us. I have one here, and just for the record, Mr. Speaker, I'm 44 years old, and I'm going to share some of my memories at Red Spot. Mr. Speaker, there's a picture that I see found here in 1991, of Rinro, for those of you from Georgetown, remember him? I know the Honorable Speaker of the House does remember him. Rinro. One of Cayman's iconic fishermen. Cayman Brack at that too. You're correct, Mr. Speaker. And in the picture, you'll see an anchored, what I call old school way of lifting and hoisting of boats. They used to bore a hole in the iron shore and put iron wood in it. And that's an indication to me, Mr. Speaker, of how old this location is by way of use for fishing. Now, Mr. Speaker, I am certain that my colleagues knew that I would have done as much research as I need to do for this topic. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to try my endeavor best not to call the individual name who currently owns it, because it's unnecessary. But, Mr. Speaker, this property was purchased from Mr. Alfred de Costa Bird in 1973 by the now owner and another owner who, unfortunately, may his soul rest in peace, passed away in 2006. Mr. Speaker, I am almost certain that this property was in use for the historical and cultural means way before the individual who is the current owner, who was born in 1943 in the United Kingdom, who we are happy to say decided to make the Cayman Islands his home. He's now a part of our family, Mr. Speaker, and his whole family is a part of us. We have joined hands together, quite like you do with a marriage. You embrace your in-laws and you move on together and you create a new branch of the family tree. These individuals that I'm speaking of helped pave the way for Cayman Islands financial services, and we thank the individual. Mr. Speaker, you may notice I am continuing to avoid calling the individual's name. And though I appreciate all that you may have contributed to this country, Yeah, he. Did I say? Oh, he have contributed to this country. It still tells me that we have a problem when, after coming here in such early times of this little island that was developing into a financial services location, and as I said, 1973 when they bought the property, that was when they used to accuse us of money laundering every day because we had a bank on every corner. And they saw us little old island people, and when they purchased the property, I'm almost certain they saw some little old Georgetowners coming out with a little 14-foot boat, 16-foot boat, coming there to that spot and fishing, because it hasn't stopped. The behavior on that location didn't just pop up overnight. So they knew that the good people of the Cayman Islands was using that location for what is accepted to be a community good, public interest good. It was part of servicing the community of food, while at the same time building our culture and our heritage as we know it today. Mr. Speaker, Red Spot is the first piece of tourism and cultural component that our visitors see when they get off of a cruise. It's the first thing outside of a cement building and our flag that they actually see as Caymanian activity, as it once was, and for some still is. But this individual that I'm speaking of, after coming here contributing so much, and we have embraced you, there's been attempts to remove the men and women who use the location, who have been using it for tens of decades. And then I asked him that question, Mr. Speaker. I was there at the location when they were served by documents from lawyers. So there's no second-hand information. Matter of fact, you see, they didn't even know I was elected because this was in the last administration. They sent their lawyers, and the good fishermen out there called me up and said, Ken, they came in just now and everybody pretending like they didn't know who it was. But they're coming back. They said they're coming back at 3, and I was there at 2:45 and served them to give them notice to come off for selling fish. And you know the disappointing part about that, Mr. Speaker, is I've checked with the good Minister for Planning. There's nothing under our planning laws that could possibly even be built there. It's not like, say, for instance, we're taking away a piece of land where we're taking away his economic opportunity from him. The man can't do nothing with the land. So what that tells me, Mr. Speaker, is you're being spiteful. Mr. Speaker, I know the Honorable Leader of Opposition went to him. I can only speak about 2 terms, this term and last term, because I begged Joey, I almost somewhat politically, sorry, my apologies. Thank you, Madam Premier. I begged the leader, the now Leader of Opposition, back then when he was minister, please, for my good people of town. I even gave him a bit of a political joke to say, I'm going to make a political thing and campaign against you. He knows, he remembers. I can't say he didn't do anything. I saw the correspondence. I saw the emails where he reached out to him. So I saw the attempt. But all the narratives thus far of the attempts and the interactions with the good people that are out there who are using it tells me there's an attitude that they do not care about our feelings in respect to what this location means to the people. Because even after that administration, then this administration have reached out to the point where we're saying we'll give you more than market value. Make an exemption on the cabinet for something that I can't say no value to him, that would be inappropriate, but not something that he can do anything with. And then you hear the threats of, boy, if we take him to court, you know, he's that type of person, he'll take you back to court and appeal it and appeal it and appeal it and go to court, go to court. Mr. Speaker, the good Minister of Infrastructure did say, it is time to show the people of this country that we're willing to go to court for them. Stop being scared and frightened because they got money and they're willing to take us to court. You know why they send us up inside here for? To protect them. Mr. Speaker, let's get into what the law says. Let's get into what the law says in this respect, Mr. Speaker. Because I don't want us to think, because here's what's going to happen, Mr. Speaker. After this passionate delivery, these young pups coming in here in politics saying they're going to do the right thing. After we leave, they're going to say, this is going to impede on the freedom of land and right to ownership. What they're saying is wrong, and it's going to break down the institution of ownership, upon which Cayman Islands is very known for. You can come here and own anything free as you go. No restrictions whatsoever. Maybe that's our problem, we're too loose, but we're going to get to that. And they're going to say that if the government does a compulsory acquisition, it's going to set a precedent. Oh, I hope it does, because there's a couple other places around here that should be under the same consideration. Mr. Speaker, the Cayman Islands Constitution Order, Section 15 says, subsection 1, government shall not interfere in the peaceful enjoyment of any person's property, and shall not compulsory take possession of any person's property, or compulsory acquire an interest in or right over any person's property, or any description, except, keyword, except, meaning sometimes there's a reason to do something different than what I just read. Except in accordance with the law and where, and this is the most important part, Mr. Speaker, and for those who are listening, Cayman Islands Constitutional Order 15, subsection 1A. Except in accordance with the law and where the interference, taking of possession or acquisition is necessary or expedient in the interest of, now the first couple is not what we're trying to focus on, but I'll get to the one I'm talking about. In the interest of defense, public safety, public order, public morality. I think there's a bit of a morality issue here, but that one may be not as strong to defend when the AG goes to court for us, because he will. Or public health, town and country planning, or development or utilization of any property in such manner, and this is the part that I'm going to delve on, Mr. Speaker, as to promote the public benefit or the economic well-being of our community. Mr. Speaker, what that tells me, and I'm going to take the AG's advice and say, go to school for law, because I love to argue. He said, I still got time, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I believe, because I hear the threat that they're going to appeal and appeal and appeal and appeal and appeal if we try to compulsory acquire it. Now, Mr. Speaker, you notice the difference in the delivery of the Honorable Premier. She has a role as the Premier to be very diplomatic, elegant, and if I ever get there one day, maybe in the next 10 years, I'll do the diplomatic, elegant stuff. Right now, I'm the Minister of Tourism and the representative for Georgetown Central, so I can be a little bit more rough. Right, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, this right here, I believe, gives our Attorney General enough fight to be able to go to court and stand and win. Mr. Speaker, that's my opinion. Remember now, there's a separation of powers, the judiciary and the parliament. But one thing I do know, that they will reach over to parliament sometimes to try to find out what the will or the spirit of any law was created. Now, this wasn't just put in here just by mistake, you know. So, in my opinion, Mr. Speaker, can we think of an example upon which the creators of our Constitution would have put the words in such a manner to promote public benefit and for the economic well-being of the community? Mr. Speaker, here's what I don't want to happen, and I think this is why you see the more delicate approach by the Honorable Premier, who else was very gentle with it. I know it wasn't the Minister for Infrastructure. I think maybe the Honorable Deputy Premier, if he gives contributions, would be just a little bit more delicate than I am. But, Mr. Speaker, you see, you make me lose my frame of thought now. Mr. Speaker, that's not a good lawyer quality at all. You need to write your notes down and make sure you remember where you're going with your argument. Mr. Speaker, we're willing to fight this fight because it has to set a precedent and clarity as to what people are willing to do. And Mr. Speaker, I think that I don't know how much more that the government can be gentle in this respect to this property. From paying more money, administration after administration, and what is going to end up happening. And sadly, this is now going to be public record. Now the people now going to see that there's an argument with somebody who is a Caymanian, who came here and became Caymanian here, did not respect our way of life and see that this is important to us, to be spiteful and hold on to it just because he doesn't want them there. You know what's going to cause? Us and them again. That's what this is going to come out to be. It's going to be about the haves and the have-nots. And there's no good reason, none, why this gentleman wouldn't be willing to sell. Matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, I've even heard that the family members are willing to consider selling, but it's the father that is holding fast to the position just because don't want to be told what he can and cannot do, which is, I mean, I guess I kind of have the similar qualities myself, right? But, Mr. Speaker, you know how many generations have used that location? I'm not that stubborn. I'm not that stubborn, Mr. Speaker. I remember going there with my father, Vernon McAllister McField, cleaning grunts and mangras while getting my foot tear up from Iron Shore, trying to be a little island boy walking on Iron Shore. Ask him if he did that before he going to stop the people of this country from doing it. If it was up to this individual, Mr. Speaker, he would have them gone. You heard the Honorable Minister say it's good angels like Mr. Billy Adam who stand and fight to protect because that's what they want to do to get rid of them. Mr. Speaker, I hope that after this debate, and they can hate me, I still represent the people of Georgetown Central until otherwise. And I've had a lot of people dislike me in my life. That's okay, I can learn to live with that. But what I'm not going to learn to live with is the continued approach to changing who we are as Cayman. You know, the Minister for Border Control said a very good point. I never thought about it until he said it. I can't imagine that location being anything else. Has anybody else thought about that? If they are successful in their attempt to remove them there, what do you see there? You know, it's a landmark, Mr. Speaker. You know where you are Even you could be blindfolded as long as the window's down. If you use your smell, you can know where he is in Georgetown. Iconic location. Now, what would cause a person to want to not allow that as a history of our people? When you remember when you were talking about at one time Cayman only had 16,000 people, Mr. Speaker. You recorded even when they had 500. 8,500. Mr. Speaker, I can bet you $1 million they were using that same location then. Why? Why are we even here? And you understand why our people feel a particular way when people come to our country, become a part of our family, and then you take positions like this. What more? What is it? Can somebody else explain it to me? What is it? What is the agenda here? I mean, Mr. Speaker, I think my good colleague from Bontown West used to say Cayman has a disease called bad mind. And by the sounds of it, this person has a full dose of it. Mr. Speaker, I can say this. This motion asks us to consider. And I am happy that both the mover of the motion and the seconder of the motion brought this, because obviously, you know, as a member of cabinet, I can't bring a motion unless it's something we agree to in cabinet. And the most appropriate way to deal with this is a very diplomatic approach like the Honorable Premier has done. But I am so glad that I had the opportunity to vent this one off my chest. I'm so glad I can be able to say to the good people of Georgetown Central, I've been fighting with in my own government to go out there and be ready to fight and take this on. Because when people elect you to protect them, to look out for you, and they see nothing, they say, well, you don't care. We don't even have a reason. We don't have a reason to say why they're being challenged. Well, Mr. Speaker, call it politics if they want. But Kenneth Bryan supports this motion with every atom within his body, every inch of my soul, and every drop of my blood in my body. And I hope to God that that piece of land don't cause anybody else's blood to drop. So, Mr. Speaker, I really hope that strong minds prevail, but our people are getting fed up.
Minister.
Yes, sir.
I know you crossed the line. I reflected on it for a few seconds. I would ask you to withdraw that and that it be stricken from the Hansard of this House. In this day and age, we do not want to even seem to invite violence, and that's what that does. Madam Clerk, please act accordingly.
Mr. Speaker, I will follow your directions fully. But, Mr. Speaker, I think that the record would show that I said, I hope it does not.
Minister, please do not try me. You understand full well what I'm talking. Ministers, members of this House cannot even seem to be inviting violence in the times that we live in. You must understand that. You have a very responsible position. Please act accordingly, or I will ask you to please resume your seat and we will move on. No more buts.
Politics is a very interesting thing, Mr. Speaker. But such is life. Let the record be restricted. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity to speak to these remarks, and I hope that the government is successful on behalf of all the Caymanians that care about that location. And hopefully this will be the administration that actually gets it done after numerous requests by the previous administration and many other ones to do it. And thank you for allowing me my contributions.
Does any other member wish to speak?
No.
The Honorable Minister for Sport and Culture.
Heritage.
Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just rise to give a very short contribution on the private member's motion number 3, 24, 25, and the motion to acquire Red Spot, and to also facilitate and protect the continued sustenance of the fishing community of the Cayman Islands with a fish market. Mr. Speaker, as the Minister with responsibility for heritage, I support this motion. But we must not stop at Red Spot. We must develop comprehensive legislation to preserve our heritage and other cultural spots. Mr. Speaker, whatever legislation is developed, it should cover historical homes, the rest of the slave walls that we have existing, whatever turtle crawls we have left, and especially areas in East End like Winner's Land. It is one of the sites that should be preserved for our people. And cattle. But the ministry has been working through some hard-working civil servants, and they have a list of over 100 historical buildings and areas, and outside of that list of 100 plus, there's other land of historical interest on a national terms. But Mr. Speaker, this particular spot the motion refers to has been a very emotive issue, not only for the people of Georgetown, but for the country as a whole. And this government, and any other government, Mr. Speaker, must make a concerted effort to preserve as much of our culture and heritage before it disappears through whatever legislative means that must come before this House and be passed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable Member from Bordentown West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will be the first to admit that I am an accidental seconder of this motion, because the original person who wanted to second this motion was the Honorable Minister for Planning. And you, I guess, understand why I ended up seconding the motion. Mr. Speaker, as I sat there and I listened to...
Honorable Member, since you've introduced that point, let me make it clear that Erskine May puts it beyond doubt. You cannot be both a minister and a private member. There is no hybrid. It's a private member's motion. It can only be moved and seconded by a private member. A private member is a member of the House who is not a member of the Cabinet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to say that to, I guess, reaffirm where so the members, so the voters in the North Side at least know where their their representative mindset was. So I really don't want to take any false credit for something that originally did not include my name. So I just wanted to put that out there. from that standpoint. But, Mr. Speaker, as I sit here and I guess listen to everyone spoke, I too had my own memories, I guess, and my memories for me actually go back to my father, the late Roy Saunders, where it was a Sunday morning routine where we go down to Holiday Inn for a nice buffet that they used to have. And then he would stop by Boose's shop. Then he would traverse over to the fish market. As a little boy, I would just sit there and just listen to those men talk and regale their stories of when they went to sea and everything else. And every time I pass that spot, it takes something from me because it reminds me of my own father. So I do understand the emotional connection that that piece of property has with many residents inside this house and outside this honorable house. Mr. Speaker, I will admit that when the member for West Bay West asked me to second the motion and I came to sign it, I also paused. Not from the fact that I didn't support the motion, but rather from the fact that I recognize what the motion is asking for. And I think every member of this honorable house also knows the importance of private property rights. And it's one thing where you do it for roads and everything else in the greater good. But it's a different thing when you go in after, I guess, private land for something else. So it's important for the public to recognize that while we do recognize the emotive issue that this property has, and also the, I guess, the historical connections for many inside this house and outside this house, it is not something that any government would take lightly in terms of infringing on anyone's property rights. But I think it's also important for the public to know that successive governments have gone above and beyond to try to find some way to accommodate. And like anything else, this would be a last step resort. What I can say is that I do also recognize many of the fishermen out there that depends on that for a living. And if there's one thing that anyone hates in any society, in any economy, and I'm sure all members in this house recognize that if there's one thing that can destroy any economy, it is the word uncertainty. And no one wants to operate in an uncertain environment. People will this evening go and spend money in supermarkets, they'll go book tickets, they'll do things. And the reason that they will do that is that they have some certainty that they still have a job, they still have an income coming in, and that their families will be okay. And the minute we start having members of our society operating in an uncertain situation, then it also creates other uncertainty amongst others. So it is a situation where I do feel it for the many of the fishermen that are out there who need some level of certainty. And I was here in the last session, the last government, where it was an issue, and I remember many members in this honorable house, when you were also premier, pleading with you from that regards, and I know that your government also made significant steps to try to also acquire the property. So it is kind of sad to some extent that we are getting at this point. But, Mr. Speaker, what I would like to say to members, especially in this house, is that if there's one thing that should always keep in mind, is that in the end, we'll not be remembered for what we inherited, but rather for what we leave behind. And I also recognize, Mr. Speaker, that this is the last motion that we have dealing with today. And before I got up to speak, I was looking at the order paper, and I looked at the three motions. The first one that was brought by the member for the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, the member for Georgetown North, that dealt with the properties the first time Caymanian buyers. Then I look at the second motion, which myself and the member for West Bay West brought, that dealt with expungement of criminal records, and now this motion. And I can say, Mr. Speaker, that this is the first time I think we have gone through a session in one day where everything that we did in this house was all about the people. I mean, this is probably the first time we don't think we have a financial services bill or something else. Today was actually a good day, I would say, for the people of this country, that everything really that we did today focused on them. Not to say that we haven't done that and that the other areas aren't important, but this is one time I can say that all three pieces of motions that we dealt with today was all about the people. And I think if anything, when we leave here today, that is something that we should all be proud of, that we can go and say to our constituents, we really did something today that the people can see, touch, and feel in terms of their daily lives. And I can't reiterate it enough, Mr. Speaker, when I say, and I continue to say, that as legislators, as parliamentarians, as political leaders, in the end, we will not be remembered for what we inherited, but again, for what we leave behind. And I thank the member for West Bay West for bringing this motion and asking me to second it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I try to make this as brief as I can. I hesitated on whether to make a contribution, but I think I'm duty-bound to do so. So far, I think the most memorable remark of the day was from the Minister of Labor, for Labor, in that it's hard to imagine what would be there other than the fish market. It didn't dawn on me. I think that was a poignant comment, sir, because I wouldn't have known that it wasn't anything other than as such until I was elected. And the only reason I found out the ownership structure is because the principal owner is my constituent. So just as others have the freedom and responsibility to represent the genuine, valid interest of their constituencies, I in turn am bound to put forward the view of my constituent. In my time of knowing him as a relationship between MP and constituent, I've never detected evasiveness or an unwillingness to sell. He had outlined in pretty significant detail prior attempts that for one reason or another has stopped and started. But as this motion arose, I gave an undertaking to caucus that I would contact him. And although the article in the Compass may have ignited particular passions on his part, I still have not detected an unwillingness to sell or come to some other arrangement for the use of the fish market. So I would align myself with the views that many have expressed. Much of what I just heard the member for Bordentown West suggest, the leader of the opposition and the premier, that we consider this motion as what will hopefully be a last resort. But I do think that there is a meaningful mutual outcome that can be achieved, and what this motion can perhaps be utilized as, Mr. Speaker, as a tool to drive the parties to sustained efforts to get to the end of a transaction. From what I understand, there has been efforts here and there, but I don't know that there have been sustained discussions between, say, two formal parties. And maybe that is the result of the motion, that the AG would understand the seriousness of the government, because it is a valid concern that's being expressed. And the AG would then have instructions to then mobilize and enact a proceeding, informal proceeding and negotiation to drive this to a amicable solution. I don't detect any fear on our side in terms of litigation. The government is involved in tons of litigation. So I think the AG is probably in court more than he may like. It's just a matter of what's most cost effective. If we can limit cost and tension and acrimony and get to a mutual desired outcome, then that should be attempted first in a more sustained and focused way. So I believe that a fair degree of confidence that we can get there. If we put aside whatever happened in the past, whatever didn't work, whatever was a stop and start, and put that behind us, this motion can then mark that this is a serious issue that needs to be dealt with, institute formal negotiations, and have it done for the benefit of the country. I think we can get there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Premier. Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? As no other member wishes to speak, I'll invite the Honourable mover of the motion, the Honourable member from West Bay West, to exercise his right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I shall not be long. Oh, yeah. Mr. Speaker, firstly, let me thank the seconder for working and not only just coming on the last minute, but he believes in what we're doing. That's the important part. And I certainly want to thank the Premier for her elaboration of government's points. And indeed, thank my colleagues. Thank the Leader of the Opposition, the official opposition, for their position. I especially want to thank my good minister. I think he did some of the research for you too, Mr. Speaker. But I certainly appreciate his excellent speech. And although the member for tourism is not in his seat, I want to thank him for the way he spoke passionately about the matter. And I know he has been behind that issue, trying to get it solved. Mr. Speaker, the passage of this motion is a testament to how we can address a matter that is crucial to us without pointing a finger at anyone. This is the first time that recently that I've heard speeches on a matter that we are trying to do something for Cayman, for Caymanians. And we're at a point, Mr. Speaker, in time when people are dissatisfied for many reasons, when people feel that we are not addressing their issue. That's something that I feel, I see it, I get that kind of feedback every day. Mr. Speaker, as I listened, I said, nobody here is pointing a finger at any other member. That was important, is important to me. It's a testament to what we can do, and I wish we could do more of it. I do not need, Mr. Speaker, to beat my chest about what I support or have supported. For Caymanians, I look everyone here and I can say I take second place to no member in doing things for Caymanians, whether it is protecting heritage, housing programs, or what. I have been in the forefront. And others have made their vast contributions to Cayman and to the development of Cayman and to protecting Cayman. And if we make mistakes, well, mistakes are made because we are human. Not that we're going out there and deliberately doing something to hurt anybody. If we make mistakes, we are human. Oh, they will tell us, Mr. Speaker, that we didn't put you there for that, and we can easily get somebody else. Well, let's see who they get, and let's see what they get. Bear in mind, from jumping into the frying pan, into the fire from the frying pan. I don't think that we get together on a matter like this one, or that we can get together, I should say, without wrangling and jangling. And that matters to our people. It does. Mr. Speaker, some excellent points have been raised. Some good points have been raised, as the Minister of Labor could point out. But 12 years ago, around November, he brought that motion when I was Premier. And it went to where we do have legislation that the member from Bordentown West spoke about. And he spoke, the minister spoke also on his experience. Just think of it. Look at where we come from. Young boy working on dock.
Honorable Father of the House, which motion are we talking about now?
Well, if members listening, I'm talking about the speeches that the Minister of Labor made, and I'm wrapping it up and saying, look how well we have done. That's what I'm saying. And it is this motion, but he spoke on all two. And I could congratulate him on all two, because I'm saying I'm so happy that we are not wrangling and jangling today. And that's what Caymanian wants. I hope you take that point, Mr. Speaker.
Very much so. But if we can get back to the motion in question.
Yes, I'm just about finished with that, because, as I said, members have made excellent points. They have done their background, and some spoke with passion, but I expected that, because it is a matter that is affecting those people there, and will affect many Caymanians, because we go there to buy fish. And we do hope that we can have this matter settled, Mr. Speaker, without doing any compulsory process. I hope that, because that's not something that we do. That's not something that I have encouraged all of my life. But we do have the law, and for the purposes, at any time, we should be willing to do so. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank members again for their support of the motion, and I do hope, and I'll repeat it, that we can get this thing settled quickly without any legal processes. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Members have been reflecting, listening to the debate. Given where I sit now, I do not intend to enter the fray, except to say that I was in those meetings too. And I am going to say, had it not been for COVID, we might be in court, but the matter would be finished now. But I am older than most members of the government. There are only two, I think, that are older than me, and not by much. The Honorable Premier is only a few months older than me. But I have lived in the district of Georgetown since 1962. My father was Cayman's first formally trained public health officer. In those days, they called him the sanitary inspector. And as such, I was with him often in the days when they used to butcher the turtles out on Hogstye Bay. That's how long ago we talking. Henry Bush and Company, and the old market out there where the jewelry store is now, behind what was Mr. Borden, what his name was again. Where Sharky's is now, the other side of that, the back of that. Red Spot, or as many people, the older Caymanians in Georgetown called it, Dora Bay. One of the few areas along the Iron Shore that had white sand, had a bay that you could actually come in or go out or swim in or do whatever. They called it Red Spot because if anyone who looks there now, the sand there is a distinct color that is different from that on 7 Mile Beach. How it comes by the red tone, I don't know. They called it Dora Bay because Miss Dora lived the other side of the road in one little house. So I can say, not from anything anyone tells me, but from my own experience of growing up in Georgetown, that from time I come to knowledge, fishermen were using that area to launch boats and to come in and to clean fish and sell it. From time I know myself. But most of the waterfront, most of the Iron Shore had no structures on it in those days. And honestly, most of us never considered that that was owned by anybody. We just go there, throw the line, do whatever you're going to do. Nobody bothered you back in those days. But in all of this, we shouldn't forget the reality is that that land was and is private property, and that the proper course or courses need to be followed before government acquires the property. I'm not getting into that free. Just to give you my historical perspective as one who has lived in Georgetown for all but a little less than a year after I was born that we were in Bordentown. The rest of my life has been in Georgetown. All right, enough of my nostalgia. I think the motion is important enough that I'm going to read the whole motion, not just the resolve section. Private members motion number 3 of 2024-2025, motion to acquire Red Spot Georgetown, block and parcel number OP5, OPY5 and OPY7. Whereas Caymanians in the fishing community who traditionally utilize Red Spot for economic opportunities are at risk of losing their prescriptive rights to this piece of land. And whereas Red Spot is of significant importance to the heritage of the Cayman Islands, and whereas Caymanians who utilize Red Spot for income generation are in dire need of stability to maintain their fishing pursuits and operations, to contribute to the food security agenda of the Cayman Islands. Be it therefore resolved that the government considers compulsory acquisition of Red Spot to facilitate and protect the continued sustenance of the fishing community of the Cayman Islands. That is the question. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. I believe the ayes have it. Private members motion number 3 of 2024-2025, entitled Motion to Acquire Red Spot Georgetown, block and parcel number OPY5 and OPY7, is duly passed. Honorable members, that brings us to the end of the order paper today. As far as I am aware, there are only there are only a number of quite lengthy statements which are important and need to be delivered. And there are, I think, 6 parliamentary questions for which answers have now been provided to the office that are to be dealt with tomorrow. So, Madam Premier, oh, I got that transmission wrong. There are 6 outstanding PQs. The answers haven't yet arrived. But we live in hope, for fear that you die in despair. We live in hope. So there may be some responses to parliamentary questions tomorrow, but we do have those statements. So I am proposing that Parliament convene as usual at 10 tomorrow, and we deal with what government business there is. Whether there are questions or not remains to be seen, but the statements for certain, we have those. And then, Madam Premier, you can direct members and myself whether you wish to convene Finance Committee following that, or whether you wish to defer that until Friday morning. So Finance Committee, just received the indication, will be on Friday, starting at 10. Well, 9 for 10. But so we should get through tomorrow's business, I would expect, by the luncheon, usual luncheon suspension. Madam Premier, may I invite you to move the adjournment? Unless there is something else you wish to say.
Only to say the invitation is gladly accepted, Mr. Speaker, and with much delight, I move the adjournment of this Honourable House until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. And as you indicated, although we may finish by lunchtime, there are some other commitments, speaking engagements that we want to facilitate, and we have to complete at least 2 more round robins to be ready for Finance Committee on Friday.
The question is that the House do now adjourn until 10 a.m. tomorrow, Thursday. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. I believe the ayes have it. The House is accordingly adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow, Thursday.